The Indiana Farmers Coliseum is a 6,500-seat multi-use arena located within the Indiana State Fairgrounds complex. Opened in 1939 as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's Public Works program, the arena has hosted many famous speakers and events. A quick look at the official website will show you that such illustrious figures as the Dalai Lama, John F. Kennedy, Elvis, and the Jackson 5 are included amongst the many famous faces to have graced the stage of the Coliseum. However, there is one event in the history of the arena that does not appear on this page, and that is the 1963 Holiday on Ice disaster, a tragedy which ended with scores of people killed and hundreds more injured. On the 31st of October 1963, the Coliseum was hosting a Halloween special. The entire floor of the arena had been transformed into a huge ice rink for the Holiday on Ice spectacular. These glitzy events, a melange of ice skating, dance, music and fireworks, were incredibly popular with families during the 1950s and the 1960s, and the Halloween show booked at the Coliseum was no exception. Attendance records for that night show that over 4,300 people were present. As men, women and children packed into the arena and settled in to watch the show, they were completely unaware that just beneath their feet, the seeds of disaster were being sown. Situated below the rows of seats, there was an access corridor where patrons could buy souvenirs and refreshments. And it was here, inside a storage room located adjacent to the gift stall and concession stands, that a rusty and corroded liquid petroleum cylinder was slowly but steadily leaking. Over the course of several hours, the sealed, unvented storage room had filled with flammable gas. All that was now needed was a spark. At around 11 p.m, one of the concession store managers noticed the whiff of gas coming from the room. Forcing the door open, he saw what appeared to be a room full of white mist and the overpowering smell of gas. Immediately realising the danger, he called for his nearby co-workers to get away from the area. One employee went into the room to see if he could stop the leak, but he had to retreat, coughing and choking on the fumes. But it was already too late. The first tendrils of escaped gas had reached the concession stands and had come into contact with the glowing hot heating element of a popcorn making machine. Up above, the rapt audience was getting ready for the show's big finale when the gas exploded. Eyewitness Walter Spangler described what happened. Suddenly, there was a dull thump. Immediately, there was a tremendous column of fire, about 15 feet in diameter and 40 to 50 feet high. Along with it was literally a column of bodies. I saw dozens of people flying through the air, their arms and legs outspread. Then there was just screaming. The explosion had occurred under the southeast end of the arena, blowing out whole rows of seats filled with spectators. Chairs, concrete, wounded survivors, bodies and body parts were hurled up and out, some crashing into the arena roof high above before falling back down onto the ice. Audience members sitting across from the blast were peppered with flying chunks of masonry, metal and concrete. A supporting wall beneath the stands then collapsed, leaving a gaping crater some 50 foot wide where moments before families had been sitting watching the show. The scene of destruction was so appalling that most of the witnesses seemed to be in shock. Often in these situations, the crush for the exits can cause more injury than the initial incident, but much to the credit of the audience, there was no mass rush or panic to the exits, even when a second explosion rocked the arena, sending up a huge fireball to the rafters. The performers left the ice in an orderly manner, and in an almost surreal touch, the band kept on playing as the arena was evacuated of all who were able to walk out. Firemen and police were quickly on scene as the rescue efforts began. There were many people left alive but wounded, most of them still trapped in the debris. Policemen, firemen, audience members who had stayed behind, even members of the band, joined in to the task of desperately trying to free those still alive but that were trapped in the wreckage. The ice rink itself had become an impromptu morgue, with rows of bodies laid out on the ice on plywood boards. Blankets were brought to cover the dead, partly to preserve some dignity, but also to help the people involved in the ongoing rescue avoid the sight of the severe injuries which most of the dead had sustained. Some were so badly burnt that rescuers had no idea if they were men or women. One local reporter later described the carnage as the worst I have seen since combat in World War II. Dick Baldwin, a staff photographer for the WRTV local television station who was on site minutes after the initial blast, described the scene. When I got inside and you could see the fire and the debris and the bodies and the blood, it was as if it was a Hollywood set, that it was a disaster movie instead of the real thing. An adjacent cattle barn was set up as a temporary hospital and emergency triage centre as rescue efforts continued through the night. The area around the Coliseum was in chaos, with numbers of dazed and wounded audience members mingling with the arrival of crowds of onlookers and police. Reporter Richard Roberts stated, "The fairgrounds itself was almost like a battleground, the surrounding streets thick with police and the edges of the streets jammed with crowds like war refugees, slowing the movement of ambulances and fire engines. Emergency services and an army of volunteers worked through the night, pulling the injured from the wreckage, clearing debris, and helping to identify the dead." By morning, the newspapers were reporting the grim tally. At least 65 had been killed, with over 400 injured. Some of those with severe injuries died in the following days. The final number of people killed is thought to be 81. Entire families had been lost, and in some cases, young children had survived, but tragically lost both parents in the explosion. Now, the cause of the explosion was no mystery. Many surviving eyewitnesses told of the gas cloud and of the leaking LP cylinder. It transpired that these cylinders, supplied by the discount gas company, should not have been kept inside the arena. They were not even fitted with the standard safety caps, and many of the cylinders were found to be in a poor condition. All of this should have been picked up in the routine safety inspections carried out prior to the Coliseum hosting any large event. But alas, these rudimentary checks had also been skipped. The fire service only inspected the site about once a year. It transpired that there had been previous complaints made about the storage of the cylinders on site, but these complaints had been ignored. A grand jury was convened to find out exactly who was responsible, and after 5 weeks of much finger-pointing and blame-shifting, 7 individuals were indicted. These included fire officials, Coliseum managers, and managers from the discount gas company. However, only one charge was ever brought before a jury, and that conviction was later overturned by the Indiana State Supreme Court. The discount gas company paid out around $4.6 million to the affected families, most of it through out-of-court settlements. Initially, there were some doubts as to the future of the Coliseum, but as it appeared that the building had suffered no major structural damage, the decision was made to repair the Coliseum and return it to use. And just 6 weeks after the explosion, the Coliseum hosted a 2-day cattle fair. In September of 1964, the British pop group The Beatles played to a full capacity crowd, and the following month, the Coliseum once again hosted the Holiday on Ice Spectacular, and this time around the show gained an attendance of over 5,000. It seemed that the people of Indiana had refused to let past tragedy determine their future.